Amina had always been the pride of the village, not just for her beauty but for her kindness. Her dark, radiant skin glowed under the sun, and her long, thick hair flowed like a river down her back. The village men admired her, and the women respected her for her humility. But there was one person who despised her, her stepmother, Zubaida. Zubaida had entered Amina's life after her mother's passing. She was a woman filled with bitterness, always finding fault in Amina. No matter how much Amina tried to please her, it was never enough. Zubaida couldn't stand how the villagers adored Amina, how their eyes followed her when she walked through the market, or how the suitors kept approaching their home with marriage proposals. Each proposal fueled her hatred. One fateful evening, as Amina returned home from fetching water, she noticed Zubaida waiting for her at the doorstep. There was something different about her expression, something dark, something vengeful. "Come inside," Zubaida ordered, her voice sharp. Amina hesitated but obeyed. As soon as she stepped in, Zubaida grabbed her by the arm and yanked her inside. Before Amina could react, Zubaida pulled out a pair of large iron scissors. "You think you're better than everyone, don't you?" Zubaida spat, her eyes filled with jealousy. "You think your beauty makes you special?" Amina's heart pounded. "Mother, please." But Zubaida didn't listen. With one strong motion, she grabbed a handful of Amina's thick, beautiful hair and began hacking it off. The pain was sharp, not just from the rough scissors pulling at her scalp but from the betrayal itself. "No!" Amina cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. She struggled, but Zubaida was strong. With each ruthless snip, more and more of her hair fell to the floor in uneven, jagged chunks. When Zubaida was finished, she grabbed Amina by the chin and forced her to look in the small bronze mirror hanging on the wall. "Now let's see who will admire you," she hissed. Amina gasped at her reflection. Her once beautiful hair was now uneven, roughly chopped, and scattered in all directions. Her head looked messy, her beauty tainted. Zubaida didn't stop there. She flung the door open and dragged Amina outside into the village square. "Look at her now!" Zubaida shouted. "She thinks she's better than us, but without her beauty, she's nothing." The villagers gathered, murmuring amongst themselves. Some gasped in shock, others whispered behind their hands. A few women chuckled cruelly, and the men who once admired Amina now averted their eyes. Humiliation burned in Amina's chest. She wanted to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her shorn hair in her hands, sobbing. That night, as Amina sat in her empty room, she felt broken. But deep in her heart, something told her this wasn't the end. Fate had other plans. Amina sat in her hut, staring at the strands of her beautiful hair that lay scattered on the floor. The pain in her chest was unbearable. Her stepmother, Zubaida, had always resented her, but Amina had never thought she would go this far. Her long, thick hair had been her pride, admired by everyone in the village. It was a symbol of beauty, something she had taken care of since childhood. And now, in a single moment of cruelty, Zubaida had taken it away, leaving Amina feeling exposed, humiliated, and broken. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to cry in front of Zubaida. The older woman stood at the doorway, her arms crossed, watching Amina with a victorious smirk. "This is what happens to girls who think they are better than everyone else," Zubaida said coldly. "No man wants a woman who looks like a boy." Amina bit her lip, holding back her sobs. She wouldn't give her stepmother the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she picked up a cloth, wrapped it around her head, and turned away. Zubaida clicked her tongue in irritation. "Trying to hide it? It won't change anything." Amina didn't reply. Instead, she stood up and walked outside, even though she knew what awaited her. The village was already awake, and people had gathered in small groups, talking, preparing for the day. But the moment Amina stepped out, all conversation stopped. Eyes turned to her. Some were filled with shock, others with amusement. Then came the whispers. "She looks terrible. Why would Zubaida do this to her? She must have done something to deserve it." Amina kept walking, pretending not to hear, but each word cut through her like a knife. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to keep her head high, even though she wanted nothing more than to run back inside and hide. At the village well, where the young women gathered every morning, Amina hoped to draw water quickly and leave. But the moment she approached, the girls turned to her, their faces alight with cruel amusement. Amina, one of them, Safia, gasped dramatically. "What happened to your hair?" Another girl, Miriam, snickered. "Or should we say, what's left of it?" The others burst into laughter. Amina's grip tightened around the bucket, her nails digging into the wood. "I don't have time for this." Safia stepped closer, her smirk widening. "You used to act so proud, walking around like a queen, knowing every man in the village admired you. Look at you now." Amina refused to respond. She knew they had always been jealous, but now, they didn't have to hide it anymore. "Let her be," an older woman scolded. "Mocking someone in pain is shameful." But the damage was done. Amina quickly filled her bucket and turned to leave, but as she did, she spotted Hamza in the distance. Her heart clenched. Hamza. The man she had been promised to marry. For months, he had courted her, showered her with attention, and spoken of their future together. He had told her she was the most beautiful woman in the village, that he was the luckiest man to have her. But now, Hamza was standing with a group of young men. He had seen her, she knew he had, but instead of coming to her, he looked away, pretending to be engaged in conversation. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She had to know. She forced herself to walk toward him, despite every fiber of her being telling her not to. "Hamza," she called softly. The men turned, but Hamza hesitated before facing her. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "Amina." She swallowed hard. "You haven't spoken to me since yesterday." He glanced at his friends, who were watching closely, then rubbed the back of his neck. I've been busy." Amina's chest tightened. "Busy?" One of the men smirked. "Come on, Hamza. Tell her the truth." Amina's heart pounded. "What truth?" Hamza looked away. "My parents are worried," he said quietly. "People are talking. They say it's shameful for a man to marry a woman who looks," he trailed off, unwilling to finish. Amina felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath her. "Who looks, what, Hamza?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Miriam, the girl who had mocked Amina earlier, took the opportunity to speak. "He means you're not beautiful anymore, Amina." The words hit her harder than any slap. Hamza didn't deny it. He just stood there, staring at the ground like a coward. Tears threatened to spill from Amina's eyes, but she refused to cry. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. "So that's it?" Hamza exhaled, finally meeting her gaze. "I need time to think." A bitter laugh bubbled up in her throat, but she held it back. "You need time?" Hamza didn't answer. Amina's fingers tightened around the handle of her bucket. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her back straight, her pride barely holding her together. The moment she was out of sight, she ran. She ran past the market, past the rows of huts, past the fields where the women worked, their eyes filled with pity. She ran until she reached her home, where Zubaida was waiting with that smug smile. "Well?" Zubaida asked. "Has your precious Hamza changed his mind?" Amina stopped at the doorway, her breath coming in short gasps. Zubaida chuckled. "I told you. Without your hair, you are nothing. Without beauty, you have no worth." Amina's nails dug into her palms. "You think you've won?" Zubaida raised an eyebrow. "Haven't I?" Amina took a step closer. "No." Zubaida's smirk faltered. "You think my worth is in my hair," Amina said, her voice gaining strength. "You think my life is over because Hamza is too much of a coward to stand by me." She shook her head. "But you're wrong." Zubaida scoffed. "And what will you do, Amina?" You have no husband, no beauty, no future. Amina straightened her back. I will make my own future. Zubaida stared at her for a long moment, then threw her head back and laughed. You're more foolish than I thought. Amina didn't care. She turned away, stepping inside the hut. She wouldn't cry anymore. She wouldn't beg for anyone's approval. She would show them all that her worth was not in her hair, nor in the man who had abandoned her. And one day, they would regret ever doubting her. Amina refused to let despair consume her. She had spent days in silence, battling the humiliation, the whispers, and the pain of Hamza's betrayal. But as she sat outside her hut, watching the village move on as if nothing had happened, something inside her shifted. She would not live in the shadow of her stepmother's cruelty. She would not let a man's fickle heart define her worth. She would rise. And she would do so on her own terms. The sun had barely risen when Amina set out to work. She threw herself into helping the village women, carrying baskets of millet, fetching water from the well, and assisting the elders with daily tasks. She ignored the stares, the whispers, and the cruel laughter of those who had once envied her. Her stepmother, Zubaida, watched in amusement at first, convinced Amina was only trying to distract herself from her misery. But when days turned into weeks, and Amina continued to work tirelessly, a different emotion flickered in Zubaida's eyes: annoyance. She is trying to prove something, Zubaida muttered to a neighbor. But she will fail. She is nothing without beauty. Amina paid no attention to her. One day, while she was grinding maize outside her hut, she noticed the village chief's wife, Mama Kara, observing her. The older woman, known for her wisdom and fairness, approached with a thoughtful expression. You have been working hard, Amina, Mama Kara said. Amina wiped her hands and nodded respectfully. Hard work is all I have left, Mama. Mama Kara chuckled. Nonsense. You have a mind, and I have seen that it is sharp. Tell me, do you know how trade works? Amina frowned. Trade? Yes. The chief and I handle the arrangements for the village's goods, millet, woven fabrics, pottery. But I believe a young woman like you could help us manage it more efficiently. Would you like to learn? Amina's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time since her humiliation that someone had seen her for something other than her appearance. Yes, she said quickly. I would love to learn. Mama Kara smiled. Then come with me. Over the next few weeks, Amina found herself immersed in a world she had never known. She spent hours at the marketplace, learning the value of goods, how to negotiate prices, and how to calculate fair trades. She took notes on which villages had surplus grain and which lacked food supplies. She learned how to distinguish quality fabrics from poorly woven ones. At first, the traders laughed at her involvement. A woman handling trade, one scoffed. Isn't she the one whose hair was cut off? But Amina ignored them. She listened, learned, and, most importantly, worked harder than anyone else. When Mama Kara gave her the responsibility of handling a trade deal with a nearby village, Amina negotiated so skillfully that their village ended up receiving twice the usual amount of grain for their fabrics. The news spread quickly. She may not have her hair, but she has a sharp mind, one elder admitted. Zubaida wanted to ruin her, but she is only growing stronger, another murmured. Even the young women who had mocked her now watched her with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Zubaida, furious that her plan had failed, tried to discredit Amina. She is just a girl, she sneered. She doesn't know anything about real business. But Mama Kara silenced her with a single look. Amina has done more for this village in weeks than you have in years. For the first time, Zubaida had nothing to say. One afternoon, while helping organize the trade area, Amina noticed a commotion at the village entrance. A group of men had arrived, their donkeys laden with baskets of rare goods, silks, spices, and precious stones. A traveling merchant. The villagers gathered quickly, eager to see what treasures the strangers had brought. Amina, too, approached, her curiosity piqued. At the center of the group stood a tall man, dressed in fine robes, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with interest. His presence commanded attention, not just because of his wealth but because of the quiet confidence he carried. "Amina," Mama Kara whispered, "that is Idris, a merchant from the Far East. He is known for his wisdom in trade." Amina watched as Idris conversed with the villagers, his voice calm yet authoritative. When he began to display his wares, he spoke with such knowledge that even the elders listened with respect. Amina was fascinated. She had never seen a man like him before. After a while, Idris turned his gaze towards her. He studied her for a moment before stepping forward. "You are not like the others," he said. Amina blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" Idris tilted his head. "You observe, but you do not speak. You listen, but you do not rush to buy. That is the mark of someone who understands value." Amina hesitated, then replied, "I have been learning about trade." He raised an eyebrow. "From whom?" "Mama Kara," she said proudly. Idris nodded in approval. "Then you must be a quick learner, for she does not waste her time on fools." Amina felt a strange sense of pride at his words. "I try my best." Idris studied her again, as if seeing something others had overlooked. "You are different from what I expected. Tell me, what is the most valuable thing a trader can possess?" Amina thought for a moment. "Trust." Idris's eyes gleamed. "Interesting answer." The conversation was interrupted by the elders, who came forward to discuss trade agreements with him. Amina stepped back, but Idris gave her a small nod before turning away. That night, as she lay in her hut, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. For the first time, someone had looked at her and seen something more than just her appearance or her past humiliation. They had seen her mind. And that, she realized, was more valuable than anything she had lost. Amina had spent months proving that she was more than just a pretty face, more than a woman defined by her beauty. Now, she was gaining respect, not because of her appearance, but because of her intelligence and strength. The villagers no longer whispered in mockery when she passed. Instead, they greeted her with nods of acknowledgement. Even the women who had once ridiculed her now sought her advice on trade matters and household decisions. Amina had risen from the ashes of humiliation. And Zubaida hated it. Idris had remained in the village longer than expected. His trade dealings with the elders had been successful, but it was clear he had another reason for staying. He was drawn to Amina. It had started with casual conversations, short exchanges about trade and village matters. But as time passed, their discussions grew deeper, touching on topics of ambition, resilience, and life beyond the village. "You are different from most women I have met," Idris told her one evening as they sat by the village square. The air was cool, and the scent of roasting maize filled the atmosphere. Amina chuckled. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "A good thing," Idris said without hesitation. "You do not crave attention, yet you command it. You do not beg for respect, yet you earn it." Amina looked away, a small smile on her lips. No man had ever spoken to her like this before, not even Hamza. Hamza. The thought of him no longer brought pain. Instead, it felt like a distant memory, a mistake she had outgrown. Hamza had been watching Amina from a distance, and with each passing day, regret gnawed at him. He had abandoned her when she needed him the most. He had let his pride and fear of public shame dictate his choices. Now, he saw that he had been a fool. One afternoon, as Amina was carrying baskets of grains to the storage hut, Hamza approached her. "Amina," he said hesitantly. She looked up, surprised by his presence. "Hamza." He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. I wanted to talk to you." Amina set down the basket and crossed her arms. "What is there to talk about?" He sighed. "I made a mistake." She raised an eyebrow. "Which one? Turning your back on me? Mocking me with the others? Or acting as if I never existed?" Hamza winced. "I was ashamed. I let other people's opinions control me. Amina stared at him, her heart steady, her mind clear. And now that those same people respect me, you suddenly remember who I am? Hamza swallowed. I was a coward. I see that now. I miss you, Amina. A few months ago, those words would have been all she wanted to hear. But now, they meant nothing. Amina smiled, but it was not the warm smile of the girl who had once loved him. It was the smile of a woman who had outgrown him. I don't miss you, Hamza, she said simply. And I never will. She picked up the basket and walked away, leaving him standing there, drowning in the weight of his regret. The village women, who had once gossiped about Amina, now looked at her with admiration. She carries herself with such confidence, one woman murmured. She has achieved more than most of us ever will, another added. Even the young girls, who had mocked her hair being cut, now envied her strength. Zubaida, however, seethed with fury. This was not how things were supposed to go. Amina was supposed to be ruined, forgotten, left in shame. Instead, she was more respected than ever. One evening, as Amina was helping Mama Kara prepare for an important trade visit, Zubaida stormed into the hut. This is unacceptable, she hissed. Mama Kara raised an eyebrow. What is unacceptable, Zubaida? That girl, Zubaida spat, pointing at Amina. She has fooled all of you into thinking she is someone important. Amina remained calm. I do not need to fool anyone, Zubaida. My actions speak for themselves. Zubaida clenched her fists. You think you have won? She sneered. Just because some people respect you? Amina stepped forward, her eyes unwavering. I do not need to win anything, Zubaida. I only needed to prove that I am more than what you tried to take from me. Zubaida's face turned red with rage, but there was nothing more she could do. Amina had risen above her cruelty. And there was no bringing her down. Amina had never expected marriage to be part of her new path. She had worked hard to rebuild herself after her humiliation, proving that she was more than her appearance. And yet, here she was, standing before Idris, the traveling merchant, as he spoke words that left the entire village in stunned silence. I wish to marry Amina. Gasps rippled through the gathered villagers. Men and women whispered among themselves, exchanging shocked glances. Idris was a man of wealth and status. A merchant who had traveled across lands, seen the finest women, and had his choice of brides. And yet, he was choosing Amina, the girl whose beauty had been ruined. This cannot be, one of the older women muttered under her breath. Why would he want her? Another whispered. With her hair like that? Some of the younger men, who had ignored Amina after her humiliation, shifted uncomfortably. They had dismissed her, rejected her, and yet now, a man of higher status saw her worth. Hamza, standing among the crowd, clenched his jaw. The regret that had been gnawing at him for weeks turned into something bitter, jealousy. He had lost her forever. Zubaida, however, refused to stay silent. Zubaida's attempt to stop the proposal. Zubaida stormed forward, placing herself between Amina and Idris. Her expression was filled with rage and disbelief. This is a mistake, she hissed. You do not know what you are doing, Idris. Idris remained calm. And why is that? Zubaida's lips curled into a cruel smirk. Because Amina is not what she seems. She has deceived you. She may appear strong now, but she is weak. She let me humiliate her without a fight. She let her own beauty be destroyed without defending herself. The crowd murmured at Zubaida's words. Amina lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. But before she could speak, Idris stepped forward. His dark eyes locked onto Zubaida's, his voice steady and commanding. Amina did not let you do anything, Zubaida. You stole from her, and yet, she still rose above it. Zubaida scoffed. She is not the same as before. She is. She is more than before, Idris interrupted, his voice firm. Amina's worth was never in her hair or her face. It was in her kindness, her intelligence, and her strength. The villagers fell silent. Zubaida's face twisted with frustration. You are making a fool of yourself. Idris smiled. Then I am happy to be a fool. Amina's response. Amina had remained silent, her heart racing. For so long, she had been treated as though her value was tied to how she looked. Now, a man was standing before her, seeing her for everything she had worked so hard to prove. But marriage? She took a deep breath, lifting her gaze to meet Idris's. Why do you want to marry me? The question hung in the air. Idris did not hesitate. Because you are the kind of woman who turns pain into power. You do not crumble, Amina, you rise. Amina's eyes softened. For the first time, someone saw her not as a victim, not as a broken girl trying to reclaim her beauty, but as a woman who had built herself into something greater. She smiled, small but genuine. Then my answer is yes. A wave of murmurs, disbelief, and surprise spread through the villagers. Zubaida, defeated, turned away in anger. Hamza lowered his head, knowing he had lost something he could never get back. And Amina, for the first time in a long time, felt truly free. The village was still reeling from the unexpected turn of events. Only weeks ago, Amina had been humiliated, reduced to tears as her long, beautiful hair was stripped away by the cruel hands of her stepmother. Now, she stood tall beside Idris, her soon-to-be husband, a man of wealth and wisdom who had seen in her what others had been too blind to notice. As preparations for the wedding began, the whispers in the village grew louder. Did you hear? Zubaida tried to break Amina, but instead, she made her stronger. She wanted to ruin her, but now Amina is more respected than ever. Zubaida, once a woman of high influence in the village, felt the weight of every whisper, every glance, every quiet chuckle that followed her wherever she went. The very people who had once nodded in agreement with her cruelty now turned their backs on her. Hamza sat at the edge of the marketplace, watching as Amina walked through the village with newfound confidence. She no longer carried the burden of shame. She no longer sought anyone's approval. He had been a fool. He had let his pride and cowardice push him away from a woman who had been nothing but loyal to him. And now, she belonged to someone else, someone who had recognized her worth when he had not. You could have been the one standing beside her, an old man muttered as he passed Hamza. The words stung. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. Desperation clawed at Zubaida's chest. She refused to be defeated by a girl she had raised. She refused to let Amina win. She stormed into the village chief's home, demanding justice. Amina does not deserve this. She has fooled everyone, she spat, her voice laced with venom. The chief, a wise elder who had seen many seasons of change, simply stared at her with an unreadable expression. It is you who has fooled yourself, Zubaida, he finally said. Zubaida blinked. What? You thought beauty was power. You thought taking Amina's hair would take away her worth. But look around you. Zubaida turned, and through the window, she saw Amina laughing with a group of village women who had once mocked her. She saw Idris by her side, treating her with admiration and respect. She saw the village embracing Amina, not for her appearance, but for the strength she had shown. And she saw herself alone. You have lost, Zubaida, the chief continued. Not because Amina won, but because you let your jealousy consume you. Zubaida stormed out, rage filling every step she took. But the moment she stepped into the village square, she felt it. The stares. The disapproval. A group of women stood nearby, shaking their heads. How can a mother do that to her own child? One whispered. I would be ashamed if I were her, another murmured. For years, Zubaida had basked in the attention of the villagers. She had controlled the narrative, made herself seem important, respected. But now, she was nothing more than a woman exposed for her cruelty. And there was no escaping it. As Amina prepared to leave for her new life with Idris, she found Zubaida standing by their old home, staring at the ground. Amina approached her, and for the first time, Zubaida looked up with something that almost resembled regret. Amina exhaled softly. I spent years trying to earn your love. Trying to be good enough for you. Zubaida said nothing. But now, I see that the problem was never me, Amina continued. It was you. And I will not carry your hatred anymore. Zubaida's throat tightened. You think you've won? She whispered. Amina smiled, not with malice, but with peace. There was never a competition. There was only ever a lesson. And I have learned mine. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Zubaida to drown in the ruins of her own bitterness. And for the first time, Zubaida truly understood what it meant to be powerless. The day Amina left the village with Idris was a day unlike any other. There were no tears in her eyes, no sorrow in her heart, only a quiet strength that she had earned through her suffering. As she stepped onto the merchant's cart, she looked around one last time. The place that had once been a source of shame was now nothing more than a chapter in her past. She was no longer the girl who was humiliated. She was a woman who had risen above it all. Idris took her to a new village, one bustling with trade and opportunity. Here, she was not judged by her hair or her past, but by her intelligence, kindness, and determination. She worked alongside Idris, learning the art of trade, managing finances, and building strong relationships with traders from different lands. It wasn't long before Amina became just as respected as her husband. She had once thought that losing her beauty would ruin her life, but now she understood, her true beauty had never been in her hair. It had always been in her spirit. Years passed, and Amina thrived. She and Idris built a life filled with success, respect, and love. But she never forgot where she came from. One day, Idris told her, "We are visiting your village. There is a trade meeting with the village chief." Amina nodded, feeling no fear. She was no longer the broken girl who had once wept over lost hair. She was Amina, a woman of wisdom and dignity. When they arrived, the villagers gasped as they saw her step down from the cart. She has returned. She looks so powerful. She's not the same Amina we once mocked. Indeed, she was not. She stood taller, carried herself with confidence, and spoke with the authority of a woman who had found her place in the world. The same young women who had once laughed at her misfortune now gathered around her, their eyes filled with admiration. "Amina, how did you do it?" one of them asked. "How did you become so important?" another murmured. Amina smiled gently. "I never let someone else's cruelty define me," she said. "And neither should you." She saw herself in these girls, the same insecurities, the same fear of judgment. And now, she had become the woman they aspired to be. Not far away, hidden in the shadows, Zubaida watched in silence. She had once held her head high, believing herself to be superior, believing she had crushed Amina's spirit. But now, she was the one who had been left behind. The villagers no longer respected her. The women no longer sought her approval. She had lost everything. And Amina, whom she had tried to break, stood before her, glowing with strength and happiness. Zubaida wanted to look away, but she couldn't. This was her punishment. She had spent so many years clinging to pride and jealousy, and now, she had nothing left but regret. Before leaving, Amina found Zubaida sitting alone outside her home. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Then Amina spoke, her voice calm and steady. "I am not here to gloat," she said. "I am here to say that I forgive you." Zubaida stiffened. "I never asked for your forgiveness." Amina nodded. "I know. But I am giving it anyway. Not for you, but for me. Because I refuse to carry the weight of your hatred any longer." Zubaida looked away, her throat tight. She wanted to lash out, to find some excuse, some reason to justify what she had done. But she found none. For once, she had no words. And Amina had already moved on. As Amina and Idris left the village, she knew she would return again one day, not as a girl seeking acceptance, but as a woman who had conquered her fate. Her story would be told for generations. Not as a tragedy, but as a tale of resilience. And so, the girl whose beauty was stolen found a far greater treasure, her own strength.